Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and this is the beginning of another reading vlog. Yesterday, I did finish reading Legends and Lattes, as I told you I would do at the end of last week's vlog. I read the author interview at the back of the book and was glad to recognise that I was right with my thinking, because Travis Baldree wanted to write a Hallmark style novel set in a fantastical world, and that's exactly what he did. So well done to him, really. I understand why so many people have jumped on this book and read this book, because it's all very low stakes, mostly calm, and again, similar to Frostheart in a way, minus the adventure aspect, but in terms of having this almost found family aspect, this finding your tribe style story, this tale with love and friendship at its core. I feel like you can definitely tell this book was written by an American, because obviously had it been in England it would just be a constant stream of tea, and there would be no room for coziness in there, because everyone would be arguing about the best way to brew tea and whether it would be in the bag or the strainer, or which tea is the best. It would just be 200 pages of argument before you even got to any form of story if it was set in the UK. It was also heartening to read a book that I didn't realise had been self-published before. I feel like someone did tell me that and I just forgot, because I'm a terrible human being like that. But it was heartening to see that this person had self-published this book before through Kindle, and that so many people just gave it the support, and then he ended up with this traditionally published contract and has done very well for himself. Hopefully one day in future I will have a similar success. Not really done much since last I saw you. I treat Sundays how I say they're meant to be treated, in a biblical fashion. I'm talking they are a day of rest. So rest is what I did. It's one of the reasons that I've always said that I will never work on a Sunday. I mean, obviously things could change, you know. I could end up having no choice but to work on a Sunday, but for really that's not something I want to be doing. I like to have that day to relax, really. Read, maybe watch a film. I considered watching what they had on Channel 1, but I ended up reading instead. So that's me, really. I think that one book I'm hoping to pick up this week is the Anthony Trollope that I plan to read in January. I think that Katie over at Books and Things has already started reading this, probably finished it by now, and it's the only reason that I chose to read this Anthony Trollope is because I thought I'd go to some of the shorter ones, because I want to be reading one each month. So currently I'm about 2 behind. But the reason I chose this one in particular, and I'm not mentioning its title, I know that it mentions the 3 main characters in the title, and it's like their accounts. It's a satire. I know that a few people don't call it Trollope's best work, but I chose it because it had the word haberdashery in it, and I love that word. That's one of the reasons I'm really glad that we have a haberdashery section at the charity shop, because just think it's a fantastic word. So I'm hoping to read that this week. Will I? Well, all my reading plans went out the window last week and I read things completely different, so as I always say, we will see. At the weekend, I was feeling some professional jealousy towards other writers who I was seeing have the success that I had wanted from my books. And rather than sit in that professional jealousy and envy, I decided to use that to spur me on to try and get my books out there. So I contacted a bookshop in Worcester that I have been, we've mutually followed each other on Instagram for a while, and they have agreed to stock all of my books, which is something that I'm really grateful for. A few years back, there was a shop in town that was stocking Our Doris and Indisputably Doris, but unfortunately they ended up introducing a fee to rent one of their shelves, and they were already taking a percentage of the books, so that by the time it came to paying me, I was worse off than when I'd started. So it's been a difficult one. And in terms of other bookshops in the past, I can remember I emailed tons and tons of bookshops across the country, and a few of them agreed that they would accept review copies to see if that was something that they'd want on their shelves, and then I never heard back from them, or I would contact them to ask whether they received a copy or what the decision was, and again didn't hear back from that. So I have been reticent for a while to actually try again to get my books into bookshops, because it is one of those things that as an indie author you really want, because people are getting to see the book more, and all it takes is one person to recommend it to a friend, and then that person can recommend it to their friend. I've had libraries say in the past that they won't have copies of my book unless a reader specifically requests them. So I've been stuck in that sort of wormhole for a while of trying to get my books out there. So I was really glad to have done that. And then I was just dealing with some other admin of being a writer. I need to get some books sent to the legal deposit office because they've been requested. It's the second deposit claim, but I always just forget that that's a legal thing that I have to actually do, which is to send these books out to the British Library and then these 5 other libraries. But because I'd heard that there was going to be torrential rain today, I also wanted to take Sally on another long walk. And as it was relatively dry, it was still very windy, but it was dry, I thought we'd do a long walk down the towpath, the loop that I previously talked about that takes 2 hours. Apart from covering me in mud at one point, it was a really nice walk, gentle. I kept it to a stroll yesterday for no other reason than the sun came out at certain points and I was seeing the beginnings of spring there, and being the writer that I am, I decided that I would just languish in this little bit of primavera. I didn't sit down to read until 10 o'clock, and I'm still reading the Anthony Trollope, whose title I can never remember. I know that it's some variation on Jones, Brown and Robinson, and we are seeing these men opening a haberdashery. I was only at page 30 yesterday when I sat down because I was finding it a bit of a slow read, and then Trollope entered into familiar territory with Robinson mooning over this woman who is Brown's daughter, and she's been promised to this other man, Mr. Brisket, but that's only because Mr. Brisket wants the £500 that he's supposedly going to get in a diary. Mr. Brisket only wants the £500 that he's going to get in a dowry. So we get this classic thing within Trollope of love and money. So I made it to page 105, and I only have 70 pages left of this book now, and I am looking forward to seeing how this one ends. Part of me, once again, is debating, do I read another short Trollope this week? That sounds funny to me. Just because I did end up having a good time with this one. I mean, I've not finished it yet. It could still enter back into this really dry tone, which confused me. And that's something that I'm actually finding interesting with Trollope, is that the way that I was always taught about creative writing is that the non-linear storyline isn't really something that came into effect until the 1950s. And this is incredibly non-linear, going back and forth, and you're having to remember what happened when. And there are some chapters which are just comedic stories. Like the most recent chapter was the men choosing to advertise in the window by saying that they'd been duped by Johnson's of Manchester, every day changing it until it became the point that this man had been captured by the police, and then he'd fled to America at one point, and people are just coming into the shop because of this hype surrounding the fact that they believe that these haberdashers have had them being ripped off by some people in Manchester. I mean, talk about the north-south divide. Either way, that was that yesterday, really. And today I don't think that Sally and I are going to get a walk, because apparently this bad weather is going to be sticking around for the majority of the day. I have got some writing to do because I've taken to writing after 11 o'clock again. I forgot how important Indisputably Doris was going to be to this book. Well, it's not important to this book. When I'm writing a book that is set in the same area as another series, and it's set during the time of another one of my books, I have to remember what occurred in that other book. And so it's been quite an interesting time recently writing this subplot because I'm having to remember just where Doris was at the time of writing. She doesn't appear in this book, I just have to remember where she was. Will I see you tomorrow? I've no idea. Once again, definitive outfit repeater. Did not catch up with you yesterday because I developed something of a headache. I am blaming talking about migraines on Wednesday during a video. It's like, you talk about it and it is summoned. On Wednesday, I finished reading Brown, Jones and Robinson by Anthony Trollope. I'm hoping that's the correct order of names. It is a story in which three men all choose to come together and open a haberdashery. However, with it being Trollope, what you're actually reading about, and you know this from the beginning, is how this haberdashery came to crash and burn. You're told that in the first paragraph, the first chapter, that this is going to happen. This is what this book is about. It's about how they failed. I thought it was interesting to read this book after reading Legends and Lattes, which was also a book about starting a business. For the first 30 pages of this book, I'll admit that I wasn't really into it. I don't know what was going on with Trollope's style. It might be because it was an early book in his career, but it was a bit tough to get into. But after the 30-page mark, it felt like I was in familiar territory and it read as fast as a modern novel. But I think that also comes from the will they, won't they relationship between Robinson and Mary Ann. Once again, it's those classic tropes within a Trollope novel of discussing love and money, and also the way that marriage means different things to men and women. I thought there was a very interesting comment made about marriage being a contract and what sort of security it can provide in Victorian times for a woman. I'll admit, not one of my favourite Trollopes, but when I say that, I say it's like I liked it. It's just not surpassed the ones that are currently at the top of my list. I think that because, you know, it took a bit of getting into, and it managed to cover a large span of time in a short amount of pages. I think that there is definitely humour there, and I might have missed a bit of the satire that was going on as well because I don't know enough about the history of the time. There it is again. I imagine that people who know more about Victorian history and the Victorian era might get more out of this, understanding the satirical aspects that I didn't necessarily get. Definitely not a place to start with Trollope, but if you've read Trollope and you enjoy him, then I imagine that you would get on with the things that are being talked about within this book. For a novel in which we do have a will they, won't they relationship, I was actually shocked by the way it ended, because I have felt like Trollope's novels tend to end in a certain fashion, and this didn't do what I expected, and I was pleased about that. I felt like it did that whole thing that I've seen talked about when Angela Carter was teaching people, and Anne Wright mentioned it in a documentary, where she said that she always told you to think what the reader would expect and go in the opposite direction. And I think that Trollope was doing that here. It was actually quite modern in terms of craft, because we have a non-linear storyline as well. It'll sometimes go forward into the future, and then it'll go back to discussing the story, and then you might go back to the present of this story, but then go back or forth, dependent on the story and dependent on what you need to know for a certain scene to play out. And I think it definitely had a strong narrator to be able to do that and still manage to avoid any sort of confusion. So I was impressed by the craft, even if it wasn't a favourite Trollope of mine. And then I started reading The Sweet Dove Died by Barbara Pym yesterday. This is one that I found here at the shop, and it was going to be thrown away because it's an old library copy. This copy was published in 1978, and we still have the thing from Dean Row Library in there saying that I think the last time it was taken out of a library was 1984. In this one, we have two men who are both a little infatuated with this woman Leonora, who they met at an auction, and I believe the older man is called Humphrey, is interested in Leonora in a romantic fashion, and his nephew James is interested in Leonora in this almost matriarch motherly figure. And I already know, based on what's in the blurb, that Leonora is going to start trying to vie for James's affections, but he might be interested in Phoebe or Ned, and we are here for a bit of bisexual confusion, I can tell you. It's so far been a little bit reminiscent of the Elizabeth Taylors that I've read, but there's also a touch of the Muriel Spark in how astute the novel is, and that seems to be my favourite work that seems to be a favourite word of mine at the moment. But it's very insightful and humorous and wry, and I enjoy that. So I'm looking forward to reading some more of that today. Will I read any more this week? I'm hoping for one more book on Sunday, and then I've got the books that I plan to read in the final week of February, but I only realised that February ends about midweek, so I will be reading some of the books I've got planned at the start of March, but it'll have to do. And then yesterday I led a writing workshop for the writers group. Basically last week someone had talked about how flash fiction has a tendency towards being glum, and so I decided we were just going to have fun, and found this story generator online, and it gives you 3 prompts for a story. I did not realise that they were all going to be about Christmas, so it was a bit funny to bring that out in February, but people rose to the occasion and we had fun, and some very weird, absurd stories, which we always like a little bit of weird fiction. I was glad about that. Now I'm in work. I can't remember whether I said about discovering that my people who'd been ordering books from my website, the notifications hadn't been going into the correct place, and so I ended up with a few late orders, and I've sent out apologies. For the most part, everyone's been fine, but I just want to say that if you did order from me, you will be getting a book in the post. I just didn't know that all these notifications had gone into the wrong place in my inbox, so I'll get them sent out. Yes, some of them there's been a delay of a month, and I apologise for that, but what can you do? Only here to draw a line under today's video, and have to do it rather quickly because we're somewhat later than usual. Not late because I'm still 25 minutes early for work, but the car was frozen this morning. My hands got very cold indeed as I tried to scrape off all of the frost and ice that had covered it. It's the end of February. I was all set for spring next week, especially after Tuesday when I had that walk and it got really warm at one point. I thought, yes, it's on its way. I'll be able to work on the second poetry collection again as well, because that's all about spring and love and all these things that we don't associate with Jolly, because that's just who we are. We like to change things up a little bit. We never do that. Routine is great for us. Let's not take that away. I did not finish reading The Sweet Dove Died last night. There was something that happened within the tale, and I began to question the identity and the motives of one of the characters, but we will see whether I am right or not when I finish this book, hopefully tomorrow. It's only 188 pages, and I probably should have actually read more yesterday. I admit that occasionally I'm falling back into the habit of scrolling through my phone rather than reading the Kindle app as well, so the reading has slowed down on the Kindle. I've hopes to turn that around. You know, I'm the only one who can change these habits. Otherwise, I started watching Modern Family from the beginning, so watched 3 episodes of that whilst practicing Italian last night. No writing, a lot of just resting before work today really. I had a lot of books to sort yesterday, and I'm hoping to get, well, I know I'm on the till this morning, but then anything else that we get, there's a lot of sorting is all I can say. This charity shop has been very lucky with donations in the last week, and some great books as well, so That's always a good thing. Anyway, I'll be finishing The Sweet Have Died tomorrow. Then I'll probably move on to Ducks by Kate Beaton, because that was the book that Charlie chose for me to read in February, and I'll always leave them until the final week. I don't know why, but then obviously in my head, as I said yesterday, I was thinking I had the whole week to read this book, and I don't. This month ends on Thursday. I'll see thee when I see thee. Probably Wednesday, but yeah. If you've read any of the books mentioned in this video and would like to discuss them, even if you maybe have a recommendation based on some of the books that I've read, please feel free to do all of that in the comments. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.